spiritual director of InSpiritTruthCenter right here in Atlanta, Georgia. And I'd like to welcome you to InSpirit TV. We created InSpirit TV so you can have an inside look at our Celebrate Your Life service. So come take a look and we'll come back and talk in a minute.
Morning. Namaskar. Namaste. I behold the Christ that is within each and every one of you. I see your divinity, because truly I see you. This morning our scripture is taken from the 137th Psalm. By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down. Yea, we wept when we remembered Zion. We hanged our harps upon the willows in the midst thereof. For they that carried us away captive required of us a song. And they that wasted us required of us mirth, saying, sing us one of the songs of Zion. How shall we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? Now the psalmist was referring to a period where the children of Israel, Judah, had been overthrown by the Babylonians. Babylonians were a tremendous empire, a wonderful, marvelous empire that had been established in Samaria. They were part of the Assyrian Empire. And at this point, they were actually going through conflict with Egypt. And they were going back and forth and claiming territory. And Palestine just happened to be caught up in the middle. Basically, it was just a small community of a few thousand Jewish. Zion was the hilltop that David had selected for his palace. It was a fortified location, and that was the heart of the Jewish people. That was where their heart was, there in Zion. But in comparison to what was happening in Egypt and over in Mesopotamia with the Chaldeans and with the Babylonian Empire, it was minor, it was small. It was a gnat that was in the way of things. It was like a brain drain. They pillaged and destroyed the city and took them back over into Babylon. And that was the setting. That was what was happening. That was what the psalmist was referring to when he talked about sitting there by the rivers of Babylon and weeping, remembering Zion, remembering their high days, remembering the peak times in their lives, remembering when they were at the epitome of their culture. And they were sitting there wondering, how can we be made mirthful? How can we sing these songs? How can we be joyous in this strange land? How can we be righteous? And how can we put on a happy face and just smile and act like nothing's wrong when we're sitting here in exile, away from our homeland on a distant shore, taken away from our heritage, taken away from our culture, taken away from our language, taken away to a place where all we are expected to do is entertain. All we are expected to do is amuse. Does that sound in any ways familiar?
Minister Stan is talking to you about By the Rivers of Babylon. And he's going to break it down metaphysically so you can get a full understanding about Babylon, Zion, and everything else. So go in, take a look at Minister Stan breaking it down, and we'll come back and chop it up in a few minutes.
Now, Babylon was not a bad place. In fact, it was the epitome of culture at that time. The great wall of Babylon that was outside the temple, the wall of Ishtar, the gate of Ishtar, was actually one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. And the hanging gardens of Babylon were also wondrous. This was a mighty empire of architecture, of science, and they were not a godless people, as the scriptures have said sometimes, because history is his story. Who writes history is the one who gets to put it down and to create it in the mold that we see it. And it was from, our scriptures are from a distinctly Jewish perspective, and understandably so. This is from their perspective. But the Babylonians had a perspective as well. There was a great king there by the name of Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar was one of the great rulers of all time, a man of vision, a man of knowledge, learning, and science, and religion. In fact, one of the stories in Genesis speaks to us of the Tower of Babel. It was a very tall tower. If you think about it, in ancient times, there were no cranes and everything to help to construct this thing. And at the top of it was a temple that the people would rise up and down to worship in. And it was a magnificent thing, a wonderful thing, a beautiful thing of architecture and of design and construction, but it also was a thing of arrogance. Because we know the story from the Tower of Babel that anytime we seek to build something that's not first built on spiritual principle, you're building on sinking sand. No matter how strong the mortar or how strong the brick that is being used, you're building on sinking sand. The mystery of Babylon is how quickly it went away. There have been many Babylons throughout the years. In fact, we might be living in our own Babylon right now. We see the ascendancy of this country that we've been in and have done so much and reached so many wondrous heights so very quickly. But now, are we on a precipice? Are we losing? Or is it going away? What happened from Babylon was not that it was ever defeated. What happened was it was not overrun from without. Something happened from within. In this day and age, we see that there are a lot of changes that are going on, a lot of transformation. We see a lot of people that are living in probably some of the most prosperous times. That we're in an age of technology. We've got iPad minis there that can compute faster than the machines that actually took people to the moon just a few decades ago. We have so much at our disposal, so much wonder, so much technology, so much science, so much of the wonderful things, and yet we seem to be eroding from the inside. We seem to be losing our foundation. We seem to have forgotten what it is and who we are and whose we are and what we're made of, and we're losing sight of the great constructed temple that we are. And so just as those exiles from Israel sat on a shore and wept for what they remembered, just as our people brought to this shore, the first ones at Jamestown must have wept for what they were losing, wept for what they had lost, wept remembering the times. Sometimes it seems that we are in our own exile. But during that time, that was the time of separation. It was also a learning time for the Jewish people, because they learned a lot about art, they learned a lot about science, they changed their scriptures, and a lot of that is that experience is now reflected in the scriptures. That's when they began to canonize the Old Testament, documenting every aspect of life, documenting, and that had its spillover effect. So as I say, the culture was not all bad. Our experience here in America is not all bad. There have been some wonderful things that have happened as a consequence of we as black people being here in America. We now can point to our first black president who's been elected twice. We have 2 African-American senators in Congress for the first time since Reconstruction. We have black mayors of this city and many mayors of many of the other major metropolitan areas in this country. It's not been all bad, but have we forgotten something? Have we lost in some way a part of ourselves when we haven't always remembered our Zion? We've forgotten so much of our history. We've forgotten so much of our culture. We've become assimilated and acculturated into something that isn't necessarily ours, and we've lost a piece of who we are. The culture of Babylon was centered on commerce and prosperity and wealth and gold. The commerce of Wall Street was centered on wealth and prosperity and gold. Lower Manhattan, there were some big towers that were there too that all of a sudden disappeared and collapsed into rubble. Interesting parallels when you think about it. Babylon, the towers of Babylon, the World Trade Towers, and how the arrogance of ourselves, how we began to worship greed, worship money, worship accumulation, worship materialism. That's what Babylon stood for. It's the consciousness of materialism versus the consciousness of Zion. Zion was elevated. It was on a high place. It was a fortified structure as well, but it represents those divine and spiritual thoughts. We can't get so bourgeois in our attitudes, so caught up into the Babylon that we forget Zion. We forget from whence we came. We forget who we are and whose we are. All of this information now is being threatened and destroyed by fear, by a small concept of religion that thinks that anything that points to science, that points to learning, that points to something outside of dogma and tradition, it must be wrong. That must be satanic. And people who try to destroy that are so compartmentalized and rigid in their thinking that they don't realize that God is above everything that we could possibly amass in terms of our intelligence. It still is insignificant in terms of the totality of divinity of what we know. What we don't know that we don't know is bigger than what we know that we know, and even the things that we know that we don't know. Never get so caught up in a narrow definition, a narrow interpretation of Scripture and learning that you can't expand your mind. If you are in a place that challenges you to accept their doctrine, to accept this teaching without using your own faculty of thought, of imagination, of wisdom, of intuition, if you're ever in a place like that, leave, because it is not for your highest and greatest good. No one has a monopoly on the truth. We're working this thing out together. And that's why it's a discourse, it's a conversation between you and I. And when we come together and we bring those perspectives together, we see that truth is a multifaceted thing, that God is a multifaceted thing. Just like a precious diamond, a precious jewel, it radiates in different areas. It's all part of one, but because of our individual expressions, our individual experiences, it's a more radiant whole. There is no separation, but there is the individual expression that makes it all more beautiful. Metaphysically, what's happening, again, is that Zion is that state of consciousness, the state of spirituality, that state of ascendancy and lofty ideas and wisdom and learning. Babylon is that material state, material consciousness. And too often we have been in exile in Babylon, exile in the material, exile in the consciousness that is foreign to us. And we need to return back to the consciousness of spirituality. We feel that we're locked in an exile from who we are. But I have to tell you that that exile is over. You can choose to step out of exile at any time. We're dealing with consciousness now. This is not ancient history. This is not mythology. This is not even about the Bible narrative. This is about us right here and right now. You as an individual. What does this mean for you as an individual in your experience? When you're feeling in exile from your finances, you look like you're in a foreign territory because you don't recognize that bank account. When you're feeling like you're in exile because of your relationship, when you're feeling like you're in exile because of your health, because of your emotional state, because of anything that has you feeling separated and exiled from the love and experience of God. You're standing on the shores, you're sitting on the shores of Zion, of Babylon. You can cross back over. The choice is yours.
So Minister Stan just broke down from a metaphysical standpoint, Babylon and Zion. So I want to ask you, not to dwell in Babylon, not to think that your possessions control you, but you control and receive your possessions by your belief system and by the power of God that dwells within you. Dwell in Zion and not in Babylon. I'm Minister Jehudi, and I'd like to thank you for joining us right here on InSpirit TV. We'll see you next time, right here. Have a wonderful week. Peace and blessings.